Have you ever watched someone throw away a lifetime of memories just to make a quick buck? Have you ever stayed quiet because you knew arguing wouldn't change a thing? My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm 51 years old, and I grew up on a small family farm outside Des Moines, Iowa. Where I come from, tractors aren't just machines. They're part of the family. My grandpa used to say, "A good tractor will outlive the man who bought it." He wasn't wrong. The old green tractor sitting in our barn had worked that land for nearly 60 years. Grandpa bought it in 1965 with money he earned double shifts at the grain elevator. Every dent on its hood had a story. Every scratch reminded him another harvest, another storm, another year he refused to quit. To everyone else, it was an old rust bucket. To Grandpa, it was proof that hard work always leaves something behind. 3 weeks after we buried him, my older brother Eric walked into the barn, looked at that tractor, and laughed. "Nobody's paying good money for this junk." Before I could stop him, he sold Grandpa's tractor to a scrapyard for $800. He thought he had made the smartest deal of his life. He had no idea Grandpa had hidden something inside that tractor over 20 years earlier. And when the truth finally came out, $800 became the most expensive mistake my brother ever made. Eric and I couldn't have been more different. He always chased shortcuts. If there was an easy dollar to make, he'd find it. Grandpa used to shake his head and say, "Easy money usually costs you something later." Eric would laugh. "That's old farmer talk." Maybe it was, but Grandpa had been right about almost everything. I stayed on the farm after high school, not because farming made anyone rich, because I loved the life, the quiet mornings, the smell of fresh-cut hay, coffee before sunrise, watching the fields turn gold every September. Grandpa said farming teaches patience. Eric thought it was a waste of time. He moved to the city, started flipping used cars, and only came home when he needed something. Still, Grandpa loved us both. He never picked favorites. He just hoped we'd both learn what really mattered before it was too late. A few weeks before Grandpa passed away, I visited him at the hospital. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, but his eyes were still sharp. He motioned for me to come closer. "Daniel," I leaned beside the bed. "When I'm gone, promise me one thing." "I promise." "Don't let anyone rush through my barn." I frowned. "The barn?" He smiled. "Some things don't look valuable until the right person takes the time to look." I assumed he meant family keepsakes, old photographs, his military medals, Grandma's recipe box. I never imagined he was talking about the tractor. Before he left that evening, he squeezed my hand. "Patience always beats greed." Those were the last words Grandpa ever spoke to me. The church overflowed with neighbors, veterans, and farmers who had known Grandpa for decades. People told stories about his kindness, how he'd repair a neighbor's combine for free, how he'd deliver wood to elderly couples every winter without telling anyone. Listening to those stories made me realize something. Grandpa's real wealth had never been in his bank account. It had been in the lives he quietly helped. But as soon as the funeral ended, everything changed. Back at the farm, family members weren't talking about Grandpa anymore. They were talking about who was getting what. Eric walked through the equipment shed with a calculator in his hand. "This combine's worth 30 grand. The trailer's another 5. He wasn't grieving. He was pricing everything Grandpa had spent a lifetime building. Then he pointed toward the old tractor. "What a pile of junk." I felt something tighten in my chest. "Leave it alone." He laughed. "For what? So it can keep collecting dust?" I remembered Grandpa's last request. "Don't let anyone rush through my barn." I stepped in front of the tractor. "Let's wait until the estate paperwork is finished." Eric rolled his eyes. "You always overthink everything." I should have realized then. He wasn't planning to wait. He was planning to act before anyone could stop him. The estate attorney had scheduled the official inventory for the following Monday. That gave everyone one weekend to stay away from Grandpa's equipment. Or at least, that was the plan. Saturday morning, I drove to the farm carrying a toolbox. Grandpa always said keeping busy helped a grieving heart. But as soon as I turned onto the gravel driveway, something felt wrong. The barn doors were wide open, a flatbed trailer sat outside, and I heard the unmistakable sound of metal chains tightening. My stomach dropped. I parked my truck and ran toward the barn. "Eric!" He looked over his shoulder without the slightest bit of guilt. "Morning." "What are you doing?" He shrugged. "Cleaning up." Two men from a local scrap company were already loading Grandpa's old tractor onto the trailer. I walked straight to them. "Stop! This equipment belongs to the estate." One of the workers looked uncomfortable. "We're just doing the job we were hired for, sir." I turned back to Eric. "You can't sell this." He folded his arms. "I already did, for $800. $800. That was all Grandpa's 60 years of memories were worth to him. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. The attorney specifically said nothing gets moved until probate. Eric smirked. It wasn't listed separately, and besides, it's just scrap metal. I looked at the faded green hood, the steering wheel Grandpa had held for decades, the seat where I'd ridden beside him as a little boy. To Eric, it was junk. To me, it felt like watching someone erase my childhood. The truck pulled away in a cloud of dust. I stood there until it disappeared over the hill. For the first time since Grandpa died, I felt completely helpless. Monday morning, we met at Attorney Wallace's office. He noticed immediately. "Where's the tractor?" Nobody answered. Finally, I said quietly, "Eric sold it." The attorney slowly removed his glasses. What? Eric leaned back confidently. "It wasn't worth restoring." Attorney Wallace's face turned pale. "Did you happen to inspect it before selling it?" Eric laughed. "It barely ran. Why would I?" The attorney stared at him for several long seconds. Then he opened Grandpa's estate folder. "There was something your grandfather wanted me to discuss regarding that tractor." The room became silent. Eric's smile began to fade. Attorney Wallace continued. "He told me that if the tractor was ever sold, the buyer should be contacted immediately." Eric frowned. "Why?" The attorney looked directly at him. "Because there may be something hidden inside it." The color drained from Eric's face. "What do you mean, hidden?" Attorney Wallace reached into the file and unfolded an old handwritten note from Grandpa. Only one sentence was written across the page. "The real inheritance isn't under my roof, it's inside the machine that built it." No one spoke. My heart was pounding. Eric whispered, "You're kidding." Attorney Wallace slowly shook his head. "I don't believe your grandfather ever joked about family." Then he looked at me. "Daniel, I think we'd better find that tractor." The drive to Miller's Scrap and Salvage felt twice as long as it normally did. Neither Eric nor I said a word. Attorney Wallace followed behind us in his sedan. For the first time in years, my older brother looked nervous. Not angry, not cocky, just scared. When we pulled into the scrapyard, the owner, Frank Miller, recognized Grandpa's name immediately. "Henry Brooks?" he asked. "He was one of the finest men I ever knew." I swallowed. "Frank, did you already crush the old John Deere tractor that came in Saturday?" Frank shook his head. "Not yet." My knees almost gave out. "It's sitting in the inspection shed." Eric let out a long breath. For the first time all day, we had a little hope. Frank unlocked the shed. There it was, Grandpa's old tractor. Dusty, scratched, exactly as I remembered it. I walked over and rested my hand on the faded green hood. "I thought we'd lost you." Attorney Wallace unfolded Grandpa's handwritten note again. "Inside the machine that built it." Frank scratched his head. Hidden inside? We spent nearly 2 hours searching the toolbox, the fuel tank, the battery compartment, behind the dashboard. Nothing. Eric crossed his arms. I knew it. There isn't anything. Attorney Wallace remained calm. Your grandfather wasn't the kind of man who wrote riddles for fun. I remembered something. As a kid, Grandpa never let anyone remove the tractor's old leather seat, even when it cracked, even when people offered to replace it. He always said, "Some things fit better after they've aged." My heart started racing. The seat. Everyone looked at me. I grabbed a wrench from Frank's workbench and removed 4 rusty bolts. The seat lifted slowly. Underneath was a small steel box welded inside the frame. No one breathed. Frank whispered, "I'll be." The box had no lock, only a simple latch. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside wasn't gold. It wasn't stacks of cash. It was a thick, waterproof envelope and a small brass key. Attorney Wallace carefully opened the envelope. The first page was addressed to both Eric and me. If you're reading this, then my old tractor has finally stopped working. A sad smile crossed my face. That sounded exactly like Grandpa. The next lines changed everything. Daniel, if you found this, thank you for honoring my last request. Eric, if you're here too, then I hope life has finally taught you that quick money isn't always smart money. Eric stared at the floor. Behind the letter were several documents. The first was a deed, not to farmland, not to another house, to an old grain warehouse Grandpa quietly purchased almost 30 years earlier. Neither of us had ever heard about it. Frank looked surprised. I know that building. It's been leased for years. Attorney Wallace nodded as he read. The lease income has been deposited into a private trust every month for nearly 28 years. Eric looked up. What does that mean? Attorney Wallace adjusted his glasses. It means your grandfather built an investment without telling anyone. He flipped another page. The trust's current value, he paused, is approximately $4,300,000. The room fell completely silent. Eric's mouth literally fell open. I couldn't speak. Grandpa, the farmer who drove a 40-year-old pickup and wore patched overalls, had quietly built a multi-million-dollar legacy. But Grandpa wasn't finished. The last page contained one final instruction. The brass key opens my safety deposit box. Inside is the document explaining who receives the trust. Eric smiled again. There we go. We split it. Attorney Wallace didn't answer. Instead, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. The next morning, we met at First Community Bank. The manager unlocked Grandpa's safety deposit box. Inside sat another envelope. Attorney Wallace carefully opened it. The room became so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking. He began reading. The warehouse trust belongs to whichever grandson respected my final request enough to protect my tractor. Eric slowly turned toward me. Attorney Wallace continued reading. If the tractor was sold against my instructions, the grandson responsible forfeits every interest in this trust. Eric whispered, "No, there has to be more." Attorney Wallace finished reading. Character isn't measured by what you inherit. It's measured by what you're willing to preserve. He lowered the paper. There isn't another page. Eric collapsed into the chair. All because he couldn't wait. $800. That was the price he accepted. $4.3 million was what impatience cost him. Weeks later, Eric came to my house. He didn't ask for money. He didn't argue. He simply apologized. "I'm sorry. I spent my whole life chasing quick wins. I never understood what Grandpa was trying to teach me. For the first time in years, I believed him. I couldn't change Grandpa's decision, but I could honor the man who made it. So I offered Eric a job helping manage the warehouse properties.
Not because he deserved another chance, because Grandpa always believed people could grow if they were willing to admit they were wrong. Eric accepted. He worked harder than I'd ever seen. Slowly, the brother I'd almost lost started becoming family again. Every now and then, I visit Grandpa's old tractor. Frank refused to crush it. Instead, he restored it and parked it near the entrance of his scrapyard. Visitors always ask why an old tractor sits there instead of shiny classic cars. Frank simply smiles, because that's the most valuable machine on this property. They're usually confused until he tells them the story, not about $4 million, not about hidden documents, but about one farmer who knew the greatest inheritance wasn't wealth, it was wisdom. And sometimes the most valuable thing you'll ever own is the one everyone else is foolish enough to throw away. The end.